Hey, welcome to the CTO Studio. This week I'm speaking to Alex Balazs. Fascinating conversation around leadership at Intuit, ambidextrous leadership, diversity, and then we also get into data and privacy in this day and age. Listen.
Well, I have a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
Welcome to the CTO Studio. I'm your host, Etienne de Bruin. The CTO Studio is where we chat with CTOs building amazing products with incredible teams. Have you chatted with a CTO lately? So, Alex, welcome to the CTO Studio.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I have to do to you as people do to me, which is your last name is pronounced
Balazs.
And how do you help Americans who struggle with that?
Yeah, garage, but with a B.
Barrage.
Well, not exactly the R. That would be interesting. Barrage. No, Balazs.
Balazs,
yeah.
cool.
Complicated Hungarian name.
Okay, great. Because when I have to explain to people that my name is Etienne and they don't get it, I have to say ATM with an N.
Oh, okay.
But that's usually the end of that conversation. Possibly the relationship.
Could be.
So thanks for being with us.
Yeah.
I started an organization, I think, through meetup.com recently called Women Who CTO.
Mm-hmm.
I know you just got back from a Girls Who Code event.
Yes, I did.
One question I got was, why do we need more women in tech? And how do you feel about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, women in tech is something that I kind of stumbled into about 6 or 7 years ago in my career. So amazingly, I've been at Intuit for coming on 19 years, so quite a long time. And I grew up at Intuit. And one of the parts of that development or growing up for me is really understanding the power of diversity. And there's all kinds of stories that you can hear about diversity that have nothing to do with the things that we traditionally think about as diversity. Like one of the classic stories is when the iPhone was first released, Apple was looking through all the pictures that we're taking in terms of like a study, and they realized that something like 12% of the pictures were upside down. And they couldn't figure it out. Like, why are 12% of the pictures upside down? Then they realized that in the real world, you have people who are left-handed. But on the development team, everyone was right-handed. And so they never thought of, if we don't have left-handed people on the dev team, we may not solve for people who are left-handed, right? So that's like an absurd example. But then now think about that in the world of gender diversity, of racial diversity. The world is a very, very diverse place, right? If you look at a company like Intuit, over 50% of our customers are female. The fastest growing segment of small business owners is female. So if we don't have a diverse workforce, if we don't have a workforce that is sufficiently represented, substantially represented by diverse groups, we don't have diverse thought.
Okay, so
we
that's
don't have diverse perspective.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. So I also spoke with a founder recently who said that 80% of sort of household shopping decisions are made by women.
Absolutely.
And yet you have in a male-dominated tech world. So that's the first time I've really thought of it in the sense of representing the customer base. That's powerful. What about team dynamics and collaboration? What have you seen with that?
Absolutely. It's especially interesting when we, in our partnership with Girls Who Code, and you see these 15, 16-year-old young ladies come onto the Intuit campus, and many of them have a perception of what is it like to be a successful software engineer. In the image they see in movies and TV is a guy in a hoodie sitting in a basement somewhere writing code. And they show up and they see, oh my God, software development is a collaborative thing. They love collaborating. Software development is a place where you have to be able to communicate very well. They love communicating. Software development requires great leadership. They love developing their leadership skills. And so if you only have a certain segment, and in fact, if the kind of the persona that has been created around the successful software developer is a very fixed segment that's not even just a male-female thing, but even within males, that it only attracts the ones who are introverts sitting in their basement writing code. That's not what makes a successful software developer. That's not how you develop in your career. And so in terms of the team dynamic, bringing in people who are comfortable kind of delivering on the other parts of their native genius. So that's one of the terms that we love to use at Intuit, native genius, which is, what are the things that natively you are awesome at, your gifts that you can bring to others. And so when you think about the team dynamic of what happens with the team dynamic when you bring people from other genders and other races and other backgrounds, different, economic backgrounds, it's a teaching tool. It actually brings out the best in the people that you already have. And one of the worst bits of advice I've ever heard for a woman in tech to get, and they get it sometimes they get it both from women and men, is, hey, there's certain things that you do that you should behave more like a man. That's horrible advice. Horrible advice. What they need to do is to deliver on their native genius and bring their native genius. And then there are some things that they will adapt about their style, but there's significant things that the men in their workplace will adapt about their style too. And we all get to be better.
I wonder how we got to this place. Is it, we don't have to get into it too much, but is it possible that it had something to do with just the keyboard and the screen, coding, compiler errors, recoding? I mean, did technology get us here, or did society get us to this place?
I think it's both. I think that as I listened to some of the early stories about why computer science was a very male-dominated field in the beginning, there's some kind of societal things where it was set up to be much the kind of the job category was built around the kinds of characteristics that are more common in men.
The computer science curriculum.
Yeah, exactly. But there certainly is an aspect too of the technology got us here, and maybe not even so much as the technology, but as we learned what it's like to actually create technology. There are schools now across the country that I've seen, and I kind of laugh working for a Silicon Valley software company, and I hear, well, our curriculum and our teaching style is built around how Silicon Valley software companies work. And I say, oh, that's interesting. How did you build your curriculum? I'm curious to see what you're going to say. And they said, well, it's very collaborative. It's less about tests and individual work. It's more about working together. And sure enough, if you look through certainly the Intuit campuses, and I've been on a lot of different other tech sites as well, and you see fewer and fewer offices, and you see a lot of collaboration areas. You look at our engineers, and they kind of hang out together. There's common areas with big tables and comfortable chairs, and as they write software, there's sometimes when they need uninterrupted coding time, and they have like drop-down offices where they can go in there and do things. But a huge part of it is like peer programming, sitting right there and writing code with someone at the same time. It is writing some code and then immediately getting it reviewed. And so the software industry has really developed and grown and realized that individual software development rarely gets you to where you want to go, that it really is a team sport.
Yes, and maybe the opposite of male-dominated isn't female-dominated, but siloed. What I mean is maybe siloed introvertedness is what got us here in a sense. Because now if you want to do pair programming, mob programming, collaborative programming, it kind of relies on characteristics that aren't well known in our demographic, right?
Absolutely.
Now you've got to be sort of semi-confrontational, or know how to be confrontational while also being collaborative. You've got to know how to stand up for yourself, speak up.
Yes.
And these are all traits that were fine if you had your headphones on coding, but it's not good enough anymore. It's not good enough anymore.
Certainly not to move into it any kind of position of influence or position of authority or position of leadership, right? I mean, leadership is not about being the loudest person in the room. Leadership is not about when I speak loudly and I speak over you and I'll tell you what to do, right? Leadership is about bringing out the best in everyone, and creating those types of collaborative environments is attracting a different set of people. And it's, I'm sure that you kind of gone through this in your life too, where you were the young guy, you're the young person in the room, And suddenly you wake up one day and you're the older guy, right? And you look down and there's these generations of software engineers, these generations of people after you, and you look at the way that they work, and boy, they're just so different. Like my first job out of college, I was 23 years old, and they gave me an office, and I was in this office by myself writing code, and what do I do now? Right? And now they're just so much more about this collaboration and working together. And so we learn from them.
So
right?
yeah, absolutely. And so it's like someone once told me, you're never too old to learn and you're never too young to teach.
Yes.
Just very quickly, as someone who has a rich history, especially with Intuit, what do you do in a meeting when you notice that there is someone that's withdrawing? And I'm noticing, especially with young women coders,
Yes.
I feel like even the young men coders don't know when to shut up.
Yes.
But I feel, so what do you do? What techniques have you used to draw people out, especially when it's in the meeting in real time?
Yes, absolutely. So there definitely is like a real-time aspect, and then there's like a preparation aspect as well. So the real-time aspect, as the leader in the room, you have to draw other people out, and you have to create space for them. And when I became the chief architect of TurboTax, I sat down with a set of the engineering team.
Can we just pause for effect there? Chief architect of TurboTax on the CTO Studio. Tyler.
Not too bad.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I brought together a meeting of some of the senior level architects and engineers. And the first thing I told them was, I am the ultimate approver of every technology decision in this group. And I plan to make 0 decisions. And people are like, what? I said, I plan to make 0 decisions. How are decisions going to get made? I'm going to create an environment where decisions can get made. And you know what? It's ridiculous. Of course I'm going to make some decisions. But if I have the mindset of I'm going to make as few as possible, what are you...
Yeah, you're creating a vacuum, right?
What are you as senior technologists going to do? Well, I think we have to make as few decisions as possible too. Great. And then do the decisions move to the front lines? Yes, the decisions move to the front lines. So now you create this environment where you're basically trying to create a space for people, right? Like you said, that vacuum, it creates this space. And the truth is that I could walk into any room, especially now given the role that I'm in, but I could walk into any room and people will stop and they will listen. And for people who know me well, they know the first thing I do is not advocate. I ask a bunch of questions to the point where it almost annoys them. At some point, they just say, Alice, can you please just tell us what's on your mind? But you have to create that space. You have to create that space. And one additional thing I'd like to add is that I grew up as a horrible introvert, huge introvert.
Okay.
And as I grew in leadership and I started to mentor and coach more, I think I got pretty far telling people the story of how I achieved success. The more powerful story is all the failures, get very vulnerable about all the places I screwed up. And they look at me and they say, you screwed up? Oh my God, I can't even count the times I screwed up. And so I was in front of this group at one point, it's a group of data scientists. And data scientists are notoriously introverts, right? They're mathematicians. And I told them, I was a huge introvert. And then afterwards, 3 or 4 of them reached out to me and said, Alex, can I set up a one-on-one with you? I'd like to talk to you about your journey. And now suddenly they're speaking up in meetings. Suddenly they feel like they have a greater voice, right? And so it's huge creating that space, because that actually goes to the diversity of thought, in terms of if all the senior people in the room make all the decisions and none of the junior people do, we're not making the best possible decision.
Yeah, and it's also then the transference of ownership, results, outcome. If you're making all the decisions, then they always have someone to sort of outsource blame to, or the results.
Yeah.
But if it's theirs, then if they made the decisions, then it's their outcome.
Absolutely. It comes to this the what we call shared vision at Intuit, which is I agree and I commit. I don't just agree and then walk away and do what I'm doing anyway. I agree and I commit. Right? And so when they're involved in the decision making, it gets to shared vision.
Yeah. And then how often do you, so I'm assuming a very important role could be for you probably is the ultimate deadlock breaker, or
yes.
like decision just cannot be made because you have 2 sets of data that both are equally important,
Yes.
then you come in and you
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. So Steve Bennett, who was the previous CEO of Intuit, was kind of a disciple of Jack Welch at GE before he came to Intuit. And one quote that he had early on in my Intuit career that I'll never forget is he said, when reasonable people disagree, it's generally because they're acting on different information. So your job is to figure out what information does this person have that I don't have, right? And so that's the first thing that I teach when I tell people is, hey, try to figure out like what info each of you have. If you still can't figure it out, escalate. And escalation is not a dirty word. It's not a dirty word because then it probably comes down to priorities. You probably have different priorities. And so if you need somebody to basically help kind of close on this decision, generally it's for me to kind of help close on which is a greater priority. And then if it, in the vast minority part of it, if we have the same info and the same priorities and we still can't make a decision, then I'll come in and make a decision.
Yeah, no, that's. I think you're right. Escalation is a dirty word in my mind, but you're right. It doesn't have to be a terrible thing.
No,
So
because it's also a great teaching moment, right? When people escalate,
to get to that point, to
absolutely. Like when if people escalate something to me, I don't just make a decision. I teach them. It's a great teachable moment to say, hey, let's go through the process here. What happened? How did we get here?
Yes.
Right.
So I saw you mention something about ambidextrous leadership at Intuit. Can you tell me about that?
Absolutely. So I don't remember exactly where the phrase came from, but Intuit has this great mechanism called the One Intuit Forum. It came from the McChrystal Group. So the McChrystal Group was General McChrystal was the one who, unfortunately, after 9/11, when they realized that the government agencies weren't working well together and they weren't communicating, General McChrystal is the one who basically created a mechanism to make sure that all the agencies are always communicating well with each other. And some part of that was technology, but a big part of it was he started to hold these meetings where all the senior leaders of all the different intelligence groups would all be together. And it worked so well that they actually created a leadership style around it. And General McChrystal now has an organization called the McChrystal Group. And they came into Intuit to help us with communication and how we lead. And one of the big outcomes was completely non-intentionally, certain senior leaders are with or holding information close to them.
As a power play? Or?
No, the complete opposite. It's just... you get this feeling that, I'm in my org and I don't even know if anybody else needs this information, so I'm not going to relay it, right? And so simply by bringing every director and VP and SVP in the company together in one meeting once a month, we talk about things, right? We exchange information. And it's a great forum for us to exchange information. So
Is that a structured conversation?
it is. It's a very structured conversation. So the chief of staff of the CEO structures the conversation, but the agenda is open. So people can submit ideas for the agenda. And some part of it is always Brad reflecting, which is really, really cool because Brad Smith, our CEO, is just one of my favorite human beings on the planet. He's just such an amazing leader and an amazing person. And but anyway, ambidextrous leadership. So Brad came back with this idea of ambidextrous leadership. So he was saying that he would often hear people say, well, it's difficult for me to make a decision, or it's difficult for me to move forward because on one hand, I've got this. On the other hand, I've got that. And these two things conflict with each other. And Brad said, that's leadership. And so the idea of ambidextrous leadership is the idea that you can have two competing ideas in your mind at the same time and still lead. And he looked at all of us as leaders, and I love it. There are these moments where you lead through kind of servant leadership and creating environment, but then there's sometimes when you have to be declarative, right? And Brad has these wonderful moments where he just says, I need all of you to be ambidextrous leaders. And it creates these, and he pauses, right? And it creates these moments where we're all kind of looking at each other and we're like, are we ambidextrous leaders, right? And so you start to think about it. And so ambidextrous leadership is something where now I can teach that too. And I think I did that even before he brought it up, but it's so much easier to kind of crystallize it in your head and to say, boy, I've got these two conflicting. Oh, okay, that's the point. Yeah.
That's the point, because I think my worst moments are when I feel like I have on the one hand and the other hand, and then I start going and then I start feeling sorry for myself.
Yeah.
Because I think, well, I can't make this decision, and now I have to make this decision for all these people.
Yeah.
And to just kind of drop that, well, that is leadership.
That's leadership.
That's crazy. I'm going to have to go rethink my whole leadership style.
Not your whole style. These are nuances,
Yeah.
right? The nuances of how we lead. We're constantly learning. Can't stop learning.
And it's also, you don't have to be a massive organization like Intuit to apply that. I mean, that in
No.
fact, at a startup level where you are wearing multiple hats, you are having to deal with multiple sets of data
Yes,
to be able to lead a small group through that.
absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why Intuit really tries to teach this type of leadership, because Scott Cook, the founder of Intuit, has been in many magazines and interviews where he talks about the fact that we are constantly on the journey at Intuit to create a company full of startups, right? That every team feels like a startup, yet with the power of a larger company, right?
Massive financial backing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if you can teach ambidextrous leadership to your frontline leaders, and they can make a lot of great decisions, and when they can't resolve it in their head, they escalate, and that next level leader then helps them and teaches them, we create a learning organization. We create an organization that teaches leadership.
And I love how you said, really it goes on what info are you basing these on? So what info is driving these two hands?
Yes.
And then escalate to a place where ultimately it could just boil down to priorities. And I mean,
Yes.
that's just a simple revenue-based decision, right?
Absolutely.
It's this week I was faced with a couple challenges, and I just thought, hey, it's business. It's not the end of the world. It's not
the end of the
relational
world.
suicide. It's just business.
No. Yeah. It's one of the things that I've developed over the course of the past decade or so is part of the leadership training that Intuit leads people through is the idea of triggers, right? What are the things in life that trigger you? And because then when you get triggered, you kind of turn your brain off and you just start acting, right? And so recognizing and knowing your triggers is a really powerful thing. And so we talk about that kind of stuff all the time. And then there are times where people around me or my periphery say, Alex, it doesn't seem like you ever get triggered anymore. I said, well, I do once in a while, but it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare. And, the reason is because if you can, well, actually I do, but the moment going from triggered to dealing with that trigger for me is rapid, like seconds. Because if you
mean dealing with the trigger?
Yeah, dealing with
Not
the trigger. Dealing with the
reaction
trigger.
to it.
Absolutely. Like, for example, one of my triggers is when people name drop. People are like, oh, well, I was chatting with da-da-da-da, and they told me whatever. Okay, so what's your opinion on it? Right? And I used to get really triggered by it. But now I realize that, okay, that is something that this person needs to learn, that is not the best way to lead. It's not the best way to communicate. And so, we talk about that's just business. We talk about ambidextrous leadership. For me, it is a choice of how I'm going to respond to my triggers. And sometimes we get these competing things in our mind. They trigger us. Oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm stressed out. And people say, Alex, do you ever stress out? Of course I do. But do I let it get to me? Rarely.
It's fascinating because as I'm building out 7 CTOs, I talk to many people who I also get triggered sometimes early on in the coffee date or something.
Yeah.
And I've found that 9 times out of 10, if I can just work my way through the trigger, in other words, instead of just checking out and seeing how quickly we can end the meeting, I say to myself, well, I'm never going to see you again, so I might as well learn something from you.
Yes.
I've learned some of my deepest lessons and life lessons from those people.
Yeah.
If I can just work through that.
Absolutely.
Because my tendency is to raise up the defense and then just check out.
Yes. And without taking a huge tangent into like the global climate or the U.S. climate right now, if you look at our political situation, I think a lot of the divisiveness is simply because we don't want to learn from each other. We simply don't want to listen and learn from each other, and we're so buried in our individual mindsets, and we see certainly there are negative aspects that are very obvious about quote unquote the other side. But what can I learn about why they think that way?
Because what does that represent? And I think about this a lot because I sometimes at 3 a.m. when I'm going down the YouTube, you might like tunnel.
Yeah.
Oftentimes I will land at these YouTube videos where, a right wing sits down with the left wing and they actually have a conversation.
Yeah.
And usually it's a positive, optimistic style YouTube video. It's not the other side of the darkness.
Yeah.
But I often wonder, what does it represent when I'm willing to sit down with someone who directly opposes my views?
Yes.
Is it because I feel like I'm compromising? Is it because am I afraid to be convinced?
Mm-hmm.
I often wonder what the meta emotion is. Why can't we all just get along, kind of thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that kind of brings me to, I did want to talk about this myth of excellence that you referred to.
Awesome.
I love this whole, you must dominate on one element, differentiate on a second, and be at industry par on the rest.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. So as an architect, so right here in the room where we're in, you've got a couple whiteboards, and I have to fight every temptation to not go up to the whiteboard and just start drawing boxes, right? So I love going to the whiteboard. I love being a blue sky innovator. I love solving big problems. But and deep down, I'm a technologist. And over the course of my time on the TurboTax team, I had the opportunity to meet Greg Johnson. And Greg at the time was the SVP of marketing. He's now the GM of the TurboTax business. And Greg is a fascinating person, and he is the most innovative non-technologist I've ever met in my life. And he goes up to his whiteboard and he talks about business strategy and go-to-market plan and all these amazing things. And I saw it up on his whiteboard, and I said, "How did you come up with this?" And he said, "I read this book called The Myth of Excellence." And I said, "Oh, it's interesting." And he kind of led me through this thing that every company in the world, you can identify these 5 or 6 characteristics about them. So price, service, quality, and the others. And really the thesis of the book is there are companies who don't know which of those things they're solving for. There are companies who try to solve for all of them. But if you look at, they actually did an analysis of all the great successful companies in the world. And the ones that are the most successful are the absolute best at one of them. They differentiate at 2 more, and actually I probably didn't write it correctly in what I told you before. They completely ignore the others, completely. And the best example is Nordstrom, right? So Nordstrom, most people don't realize, Nordstrom makes 50% of its revenue from personal shopping. You have this huge store, yet 50% of the revenue comes from that tiny corner that's personal shopping, right? So Nordstrom decided they will be the best in service, the best. If you went into Nordstrom and you said, "Hey, will you price match?" They would laugh at you. They have no intention on they don't care. They don't solve for price at all. That's not why you go to Nordstrom, right? You go to Nordstrom for the service. You go to Nordstrom for the selection. That's a place where they differentiate. You go to Nordstrom for quality, very high-end stuff. But price, they don't care, right? Whereas Best Buy, if you go to a place like Best Buy and you say, do you price match? Absolutely price match, right? So are they the best? No. Amazon is the best, right? When Amazon looks at how do they differentiate, Amazon differentiates. So it's a whole long conversation we can go into about Amazon and Amazon's leadership style. But Amazon basically says the benefits they solve for customers are great selection, great price, fast delivery. And every single person in the company knows at Amazon.com, the commerce site, that's what they solve for. And that's how they differentiate. And so, when we were looking at Intuit and we said, well, where do we want to differentiate ourselves? What are the things that we want to concentrate on? And it speaks to the goals that you set for the organization. It speaks to the leadership style, making sure that if you have people in your organization who are solving for aspects that we don't need to solve for, it actually is liberating for them to say, don't worry about that. Don't worry about solving that part. We are going to solve for our customers in the way that we believe we can differentiate for them, the way that we can deliver delight to them. And that's what we did. And so when you look at a new product like TurboTax Live, TurboTax Live was in beta 2 years ago. We had full production release last year, and we're going to scale it next year. So what the heck is TurboTax Live? So the story behind that is the internal example we used is we said, okay, how many people mow their own lawn? And so in all hands, about half the people raise their hand. How many people have a lawn mowing service? The other people raise their hand. Okay, so for the people who have a lawn mowing service, if I told you I would give you an amazing lawnmower, it's high technology. It mows your lawn 50% faster. It's quiet. And I'll give it to you for free. Will you mow your lawn? No, I'm still going to get a lawn service, right? And so it's just not something I want to do. I've already decided, right? And so if you look at TurboTax, we can make it as easy, fast, free. But
you're still not going to do your own taxes.
If people don't want to do their own taxes, they're not going to do their own taxes, right? So what if you could sit at home in your underwear or your PJs and push a button and an accountant shows up?
Are they seeing you in your underwear?
No.
Okay.
You see them, and they're dressed nicely in their TurboTax shirt. They don't get to see you, but you talk to them live, and
they're doing your taxes for you.
And you can go everything from just saying, I just need you to do my taxes for me, and they say what info they need, to doing it together, to you do it and they watch, to you doing it, they watch, and they're the one who signed it at the end and not you. Like full variation, whatever you want. Hugely successful. Huge, right? Because if you're trying to differentiate on price, to people who don't care about price, you're not going to sell to them. Right. And so that's why that book to me is just fascinating. And I think any technologist out there, if they want to think about, I want to create a startup, or I'm working at a big company even, but even especially for startups, think about which of these things are you actually differentiating on? What value are you delivering to your customer? How are you differentiating through the benefit? So at Intuit, we call it customer benefit that delivers customer delight. It creates a delightful moment where the person goes, oh, that's awesome, right? And if you know what you're solving for, it's so much easier to do that.
And I think that's in the chase for revenue, I think the first place we compromise is on that.
Yeah.
We start thinking, well, I have to now differentiate on many levels, and then you can't be excellent at any one thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's, in terms of things like, average revenue per customer, ARPC, hear all these things. And there's two different ways to look at it. Okay, how do I solve for greater revenue from each of the customers I already have? The other way to think about it is you say, how do I deliver more delight to my customers so they are more than happy to pay for that delight? Because people will pay for delight.
Yeah, it's like a tool I use a lot is Jim Collins's hedgehog concept, and the question of what are you passionate about, what's your economic engine, but what are you best in the world at?
Yes.
And not just what are you like others in the world at, but and it's aspirational. So what are you best in the world at?
Yes. And that goes back, I'm sorry, just real quick, that goes back to the idea of native genius. Because when you talk about human beings, it's doing the same thing, right? And for the longest time, and I remember early on in my Intuit career, we would try to say, okay, what are your opportunities? Weaknesses. What are your opportunities? And let's grow those. And then they kind of flipped and it said, what are you awesome at? And let's make you more awesome at it.
And
right?
it's not like we're raised to think that way.
Yeah.
It's right? You have to unlock that in people because they're not in that zone to be able to comfortably answer that.
You have to unlock the right to share your native genius with others.
So then do you sometimes say, hey, Sally, hey, John, I see this genius in you?
I do that all the time. One of the things that I absolutely love doing, it gives me so much energy, is every month I make sure I have multiple one-on-ones, but with every level of the organization. So what we call SWE 1, SWE 2, first two levels of software engineers, mid-career, upper career, and across that entire spectrum, across different kinds of roles. So engineers, data scientists, product managers, designers, set up these one-on-ones. Part of it is so I learn, but part of it too is that, early on in someone's life and someone's career, you don't recognize these things. And just for me to have the ability sometimes to say, hey, you're good at this. Hey, do you realize you're a really good communicator? But what? Right? Like they're not used to people actually calling out their strengths. That's such a huge part of leadership. Brad, actually, once again, back to Brad, is recently in one of the One Intuit forums, he talked about, hey, do we thank our teams enough?
He said that.
Yeah. Do we thank the individuals on our teams enough? Are there ever moments that beyond compensation and raises and promotions, do you just walk up to someone on your team and say, hey, in this meeting, you delivered that point extremely well. You did a great job. It's huge.
You know, something that almost instantly reduces me to tears is when someone looks at me and says, I believe in you.
Yeah.
Those are melting words.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we don't hear that.
Yeah.
The other thing
so
I know...
Etienne,
don't do it.
I believe in you.
Thank you. Wow. Can we edit out the tears? I noticed about my daughter, who, and this must be a nature thing versus nurture, because she is absolutely averse to praise. As soon as she will perform for us, as long as there's no applause.
Yeah.
Have you seen this in any kids?
Absolutely. And you know, in deep vulnerability, I will tell you, I see it in myself. So I've been working with a leadership coach for about the past 6 months. And one of the things that we dawned on was and actually I didn't even really kind of sense this or know this about myself. So at one point he said, you know, he could sense something was going on in the conversation we were having. And he did to me what I do to other people. He said, you know, Alex, you're really smart. And he saw the look on my face. He said, I just made you really uncomfortable, didn't I? And I said, yeah, you did. He said, why is that?
Why?
I said, I don't know, but let me think about it. So there are these things that about ourselves where maybe it's not even all the praise, but some of the praise. And, you know, honestly, I'm still trying to, he's a great leadership coach, and I'm just trying to, there's still things that he's told me that I'm unpacking to learn how to be a better leader myself.
And I know my wife, soon as my wife tells me, man, you're a really great dad, or you've really shown up this weekend, I feel an instant resistance go up. I can't acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's maybe you have to be vulnerable to accept praise.
You do.
Just very quickly on the introvert thing, I do want to, for the introverts that are listening, which is probably everybody, what tools did you use? Because you don't come across as an introvert.
Yeah.
And I've only known you for a couple months, so I would never have thought you were one.
Yeah.
So what tools do you use maybe to this day to kind of not like be present in a conversation and not withdraw?
So
or how do you I don't know if it's combating, but how?
No, I get it. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I would say right now where I am in my life, I'm not an introvert. So I've kind of come full circle there. Actually full circle, 180. So I think the most important thing to do when you're an introvert is to really identify why. There's actually a cause. And so there was a specific event in my life that required me to kind of ask myself that question. About 4 years into my Intuit career, I was working in Waltham, Massachusetts at the office there that Intuit had. And 4 years to the day that the company that Intuit acquired that led to the Boston office, the founder, Paul English, left because all of his options had vested and he wanted the next challenge. He's a serial entrepreneur, great, fantastic guy. I learned a lot from Paul. And about 3-4 weeks later, he took his entire leadership team with him. And they all went and founded Kayak, the travel company.
Oh, my goodness.
And so there I am, a frontline engineer. My engineering manager is gone. My architect is gone. My engineering director is gone. The head of quality is gone. The head of operations is gone. Everyone's gone. Team of fantastic engineers, no leadership team. Total introvert. I felt so sorry for myself.
Do you feel abandoned?
Oh, I felt so abandoned.
Because a lot of them must have been the reason you joined.
Absolutely,
and stayed.
Absolutely.
And weren't you invited to go to Kayak?
Well, it was the kind of thing where Paul had this team of folks that this was like the third company they were at together.
Okay, so they were just...
And so they went to the fourth, right? And so I wasn't offended by it, right? But did I feel deserted? Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I felt sorry for myself, and I went through all the range of emotions. I was angry. I felt guilty. Did I do something wrong? And then I realized this is on me. And the only person who could really do something about this, of me not being an introvert, is me. And, you know, I did a couple of things in that moment. One is I sat down and I wrote an email to the chief architect of my group at the time, Brian Ellison, who has been in Intuit for like 25 years, and I've been in Intuit for 19 years. And so we now worked together a very, very long time. So he's still a chief architect and on my team at Intuit. And I sent him a nice email saying, hey, my name is Alex Balazs. I'm an engineer on one of your teams, and I have all these ideas. And he did a great job of drawing me out. He sent me a reply right away. But then ultimately, getting back to, what is the root cause? I had to ask myself the question of, well, why am I an introvert? And it dawned on me that I was afraid of embarrassment. I was afraid if I would speak, people would laugh at me. And so I felt like I had to do something about it. And so one, I started communicating more in kind of that remote office there in Boston. But the bigger thing that I did, and it's funny, it was a different point in Intuit's evolution, because I, as a frontline engineer, I just started setting up travel. And I just started traveling to the Mountain View office. I traveled to the San Diego office. I set up with meetings with people who had no idea who I was. I made myself so uncomfortable. But I said, Alex, you can't accept this anymore.
And that self-actualizing thought came from that event where you were just distraught.
I was distraught.
And you realized you had to connect and get out. And
I had to create connections. And so I realized that my ability to communicate, my ability to build connections, I thought it was my weakness, and it's actually my native genius. That's when I discovered my native genius. Alex, that's what you're good at.
wow.
To the point where people were like, how do you create connections so well? How do you communicate so well, right? And it turns out it's my native genius.
What I love about what I can see in that is when I talk to you, I definitely feel like you're with me. Whereas when I talk to extroverts, and I'm sure I do this to other people, is I'm like I'm not
all over
really
the place.
there. I'm like
Yeah.
So that is great. I love it.
Yeah, and it was a hard journey.
You're doing really, really good.
Oh man. Can we edit out the tears?
So just finally, I kind of want to pick your brain on where we're headed. You mentioned, and I know we're in sort of a weird phase of our innovation economy around data and privacy.
We are.
I imagine Intuit has a lot of data,
yes.
and I'm sure that you're sort of having to think through where this is all going. Do you want to kind of project for us a little bit what excites you about it, what terrifies you about it, where the innovation opportunities lie?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the so I talked about TurboTax. I was the chief architect of TurboTax for 5 years. Now I'm the chief architect of Intuit for about the past year and a half. And so I've kind of have a greater purview across all the different business units at Intuit and the platform. And I can see the amazing opportunity that we have. And one of the really cool things about Intuit, and one of the reasons I've been there for 19 years, is because we start with the opportunity to deliver amazing things to our customers. And then it turns into, how can we use technology to solve that problem? What's a big unmet customer need that we can solve well, or we can enable others to solve well, and then we can do it with competitive advantage, because ultimately, we're a publicly traded company. And so when you look across the landscape, you do see these two really interesting competing forces. One is, with the advent of the cloud, our ability to handle enormous sets of data is almost unlimited. Almost unlimited. There used to be these limitations in data infrastructure, and you'd say, well, you have to separate the data because you can't have storage and compute, And now with the cloud, you basically can have the storage of where it sits and the compute of the data and the compute of the operation all being completely separate and working seamlessly together, right? Microsoft, AWS, Google all have it, right? And so our ability to collect data, organize data, and find insight in data is exploding. Intuit went from being an organization of having about 20 or 30 data scientists to having right now, I think the latest number that we saw was close to 200, with plans within a year and a half to have maybe as high as 500.
Wow.
Right? So data science is huge.
I don't know whether I should be excited or afraid.
Why? You should be excited.
Okay.
Let me finish. So now you got the other competing force, which is people are realizing that all this data is out there, right? All their data is out there. And it's not just the breaches of data that some companies have had breaches. It includes entire companies who've built their entire business model on the fact that they're data companies. We know all the big ones, Facebook and Google and Twitter, right? They're data companies. And so as these forces come together, and one of the deepest representations of this is GDPR, the Global Data Protection Regulation in Europe. And GDPR just went into effect about a month and a half ago. And GDPR has certain regulations like the right to be forgotten, right? So you have to support a button that says forget me. And you have to be able to delete all the data about that customer in all your systems and all your partner systems, and you have to be able to prove it, right? So
not just setting a flag to
no.
D.
And exactly. It's not like the old database days where you just set the file inactive. No, you have to delete it.
Wow.
Right? And so you have to be able to tell your customer, what is all the data I have about you? How am I using all your data? Right? And so all those things that came out of GDPR are now coming to places like the United States. In fact, California just a couple weeks ago passed a similar, I can't remember what it's called, the acronym, but it's similar to GDPR, and it will be effective in 2020. So we've got about a year and a half. So now, amazing opportunity with data, regulations that are severely constricting your ability to do things with data. Intuit, a company that is used to dealing with compliance. And compliance means I am collecting your data and I'm doing it in a secure and private way for the purposes for which it is intended, which is filing your taxes, doing your accounting, managing your finances, right? So for us
business finance,
small business, huge, right? And so for us, it is an amazing opportunity to do data the right way, to say it is about maintaining privacy, maintaining security, maintaining compliance, and yet using this data to find insights that help you be more prosperous. Intuit's mission.
You the customer.
Intuit's mission changed 2 years ago to being powering prosperity around the world. And at the time that we declared it, we kind of understood what it meant. But the more we think about it, we're like, we don't even fully understand what it means. It's such a powerful mission because you start to think about prosperity. And when you first think about it, you're like, oh, that's a quantifiable thing. That's like a thing like, oh, you're prosperous because we manage your finances. Prosperity is a feeling. It's a feeling. How does a technology company solve for a feeling? Right? But that's our opportunity, is to say, how do we learn what our customers, what makes them feel prosperous? Use their data to power their experiences in ways that they couldn't have imagined, right? So
insights to show insights in their own data.
Exactly.
And maybe correlate that with
exactly. So you do the tax prep process, and if you consent access to the data, we will look at the data, for example, and say, oh, we see you have a student loan. You're paying way too much for that student loan. And we will basically, at your consent, give your data to this third party. They will run an application. And look, we can save you $500 a month, and you'll pay off the student loan 10 years earlier. I feel prosperous now. I feel it.
And then you have Rocket Mortgage, which is also in this space.
Well, actually, no. Yeah, Quicken Loans is Quicken Loans used to be owned by Intuit, but we actually there was a divestiture about 10 plus years ago. So Dan Gilbert owns Quicken Loans, and they still license the Quicken name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think helping people get into mortgages and
huge, right? And that's a thing too, that as we look across the spectrum. So when you think about another interesting stat for you. So as you know, Intuit dominated and still dominates in the world of personal finance. But personal finance of today is about tracking. About 12% of the US population wants to track. They just don't want to track, right? They don't want to mow their lawn. And we're trying to sell them tracking software. And we're surprised that they don't want to buy tracking software.
And you're saying 12% don't want to track?
12% do.
Oh, do.
The other 88% don't want to track, right? So one of the amazing things that we do at Intuit that I love is, so it's another Scott Cook thing. So we go get customer empathy, right? We go talk to customers. And we had an event in TurboTax about 5 years ago where we wanted to reignite our love of our customers. And so what we did here in San Diego is we had this event, and then they got like 5 tour buses, and we all got on these buses, and they went off into like random locations in San Diego. We all left the tour bus. We had no idea what was going on. And they said, we'll be back in 2 hours. Go talk to our customers. And the bus drove away.
Wow.
Right? So then
Terrifying.
terrifying. Whoa, what? How do I do that? Right?
Amazing.
And you go into a Starbucks and you say, and you find someone. And truth be told, they gave us techniques like, hey, you can go to Starbucks, get a $10 Starbucks card and say, hey, I'm from Intuit. I'd like to talk to you about money. I'll give you this $10 Starbucks card where you sit down and talk with me in a couple minutes. And almost everyone says yes, right? But the things that you hear from these people, right? And you talk about diversity. We're in a bubble being in the tech industry and we all have great jobs and everything, right? And so you sit down with people and you say, hey, what do you think about money? You know what the number one answer was? I hate money. Money scares me. I don't care about money. I care about, can I send my kids to a good school? Can I buy them clothing for school? Can I take a family vacation? Right? These are the things that they care about. And so when you think about what can we do as a company, it's about solving for that customer, right? It's not about tracking. It's about how do I take that data
You're right.
and deliver them insights so they feel prosperous. They feel prosperous. Yes, you can take a vacation this summer. It's almost like we talked about giving permission for people for their native genius, right? We have to give them permission to live and enjoy their lives, right? Hey, they don't want to know, you spent $40 at Starbucks this month. Yes. I know I did. I know I did. That gives me pleasure, right? Okay, let's find other ways. Yeah. Let's find other ways to solve for your kid's education, to take care of an elderly parent, to take that vacation, right? And so we have an opportunity in the world of growing concerns and constraints on privacy and security to still harness that data with the consent of customers to deliver them insights that they never thought was possible. And the last thing that I'll say on that is that if you have money, you go to a personal financial planner and they plan stuff for you. What about everyone else? What about everyone else? Right? What if we could deliver that with software?
Which seems like software would be ideally
Absolutely.
positioned to do that.
And if we can't, we'll create the TT Live equivalent that will give you a physical human being.
Oh my goodness, Alex. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being on the CTO.
It was a lot of fun. I had a great time.
Next time, more. Let's just go deep.
Absolutely.
I
feel like we barely touched the surface.
I feel this was
here.
like the hey, how are you?
Exactly.
Moment.
Yeah, I expected more.
Thank you, Alex.
All
Great
right.
leadership there. Thank you. Cheers.
All right.
Have you chatted with a CTO lately? Hi, thank you for listening to the CTO Studio. If you don't mind, take a quick second and please rate and review the show. It helps us a lot. Go to the ctostudio.com for more information on what we're doing at 7 CTOs. We also have a video or two for you that could be a helpful resource for you as you're managing your company. So thank you for listening.